Good evening, how are we? Welcome to this week's weekly wisdom webinar. I hope everybody is very well. My apologies for being a couple of minutes late. Had some technical issues. Thank you though for being patient. Thank you for joining. Today we are speaking to the 11th, I think it's the 11th tenet of sovereign leadership, and that is empathetic wisdom. So with that in mind, why are we speaking to this today? Why is empathetic wisdom a tenet of the sovereign leadership model? Now, before we begin to answer that and much more, of course, I would love to pay our respects, our acknowledgements, our recognition of the Indigenous people of this land and the traditional landowners of this land, and of course, of all lands of earth. Very grateful for their innate wisdom, their contribution and their presence in modernity, and of course their past contribution and being. So with all of that said, people, empathetic wisdom, empathy and wisdom. So we will speak to empathy first, and we will move to define what empathy is, and we will also move to understand what compassion is, and we'll move to understand what sympathy is as well. And we will speak to empathy first, and you'll understand as we go through this webinar why I have chosen to bring in together empathetic wisdom as one, empathy and wisdom. And I'm going to explain that in great detail why that is the case, and I'm very excited to do so. And we're also going to understand how this particular tenet, and of course all the tenets of sovereign leadership, link into and connect to each other, but this particular tenet connects deeply to compassion, or compassion, self-compassion, basically, the tenet of self-compassion, of course being of service as well, and we'll discover and unpack that as we go. But we're also going to debunk myths or confusion around empathy and compassion as well. So we're going to understand the differences between the two, and we'll speak to wisdom in the second half of the webinar and how that really puts empathy into practice, or puts the right kind of empathy into practice. And again, we'll understand the differences of empathy and the application of empathy and what that actually means. So what is the value in understanding the difference between compassion, understanding the difference between compassion and empathy? And we want to speak to here, we want to understand self-compassion as a tenet in and of itself, and understanding, and this will all unravel as we begin to go deeper into what empathetic wisdom actually is. But also there is a greater purpose and a greater functionality behind the application of being empathetic or being an empath. So as a sovereign leader, it's important we understand, in fact, it's important we understand how important it is to be an empath, to be able to connect. But without the wisdom component, which we're going to understand later on in the webinar, we're going to really get into later on, without that wisdom element, we're going to lose the power of what real empathy is, and what the power that the real empathy can have in terms of bringing us together as a human race, as bringing us together as a collective, as a human family, but also as living beings on this earth as well. And of course, we're going to understand that. So before we move into compassion and empathy, of course, I'll give different definitions of these. Let me speak to sympathy, because we don't want to confuse empathy with sympathy, because what happens sometimes, that's exactly what happens. We confuse empathy with sympathy, and we don't want that. So sympathy is to feel sorry for, not to feel with. That's a big key distinction between empathy and sympathy. Sympathy is not connected, it's disconnected, it's not really felt. Sympathy can turn to apathy. Sympathy can turn to pity if not regulated internally, if not understood. It disconnects us from each other. It externalizes the other and has capacity to exclude. That's what sympathy does, where empathy is highly inclusive. Empathy is very, very connected. So sympathy is really our ability to say, oh, I feel sorry for that person and leave it at that, rather than actually feeling what that individual is going through. But again, we're going to understand very shortly what empathy actually is, okay, the power of empathy and the benefits. There's 16, I think there's 16 benefits that I've listed. Of course, there are many more, but 16 powerful benefits of being an empath, or applying empathetic wisdom, or applying empathy from a vantage point and a place of wisdom, innate wisdom. So let's speak to compassion, because again, we get confused. The terms are thrown around synonymously. Compassion, wisdom, compassion, empathy, sympathy. Is it one and the same? No, very, very different. So compassion is the ability to feel for another living being. So when we look at self-compassion, it's our ability to feel into ourselves, to be able to connect to our own inner state, our emotions, our feelings, what we're connecting to, how we're expressing ourselves. So our ability to understand that and to feel into that. Empathy, however, is the ability to not only understand another's feelings, but also to become one with those feelings, or one with that other person's distress, or one with that other person's elation. But we'll use distress here as a point, just to help us understand a little bit better the power of empathy. So it actually puts us into feeling that other person's distress, or experiencing the other person's feelings directly. So we put ourselves in their shoes, we walk a mile in their shoes, so to speak, and we imagine what they're going through in that situation we are also going through, but it feels extremely real. It's like when we have a thought, and we have a series of thoughts, the brain doesn't really distinguish from a perspective of, from a neurological perspective. The brain doesn't distinguish. The same neurons fire in the same way as if you're envisioning that experience, or whether you're physically experiencing it. It's very, very similar with respect to what activity is occurring in the brain. It's very similar with this situation as well, where if biologically experiencing it, if we feel it, we feel like we're experiencing it as well. So empathy is not only acknowledging our shared experiences, it is feeling them deeply. The terms empathy and compassion are actually not synonymous at all. So we have to understand that. I want to give an example, in fact, a story that the Dalai Lama provides us. It's a really good example between the two. So the story goes, just imagine you're walking in the woods and you come across someone with this large boulder on their chest, and they are suffering deeply. Empathy would allow you to feel exactly what they feel, but you would be rendered in a position to not be able to assist them, as you would be feeling that pain. In other words, you would almost feel like you have that boulder on your chest. You would be paralyzed. So although you feel the same emotions, you can't take actions on those feelings because you're paralyzed by that present moment. You're absorbed by it so deeply. You don't take the actions on because your feelings are so immersed in that person's feelings, yeah? You do nothing to alleviate the emotions of the person you are feeling empathy for, because you struggle physically to do the same yourself. That's the difference. Now, compassion, on the other hand, compassion is different, because compassion is a more objective form of empathy and relatability, or relatedness. The way I think relatability is a made-up word, but I like it. Or relatedness, rather. So, whilst you can see the world in the other person's perspective, you can walk in their shoes. You actually retain your own sense of the world. You retain your own subjective view of the world. You don't immerse yourself in their world, where you become then paralyzed by their pain or their emotional state or their feeling state. You can then recognize suffering, and you can do everything you can to alleviate it. And that's very, very powerful. You can do everything you can to alleviate that suffering. Compassion translates our deep feelings into action. So when we're talking about self-compassion, this is why this tenet is so intimately linked to the tenet of self-compassion. When we're talking about self-compassion, we're talking about recognizing our inner state, And then we're speaking to not only recognizing our inner state, but connecting to that inner state and then taking action on alleviating any pain that we are feeling or any distress that we are feeling, or if we are feeling not equilibrated in our own, state, that becomes very, very powerful for us. So also it is very powerful to understand the difference between the two. And that's why I've coupled, again, empathy and wisdom together, because we require wisdom and discernment when engaging in empathy and then expressing compassion. So empathy is only paralyzing when we do not understand ourselves enough to actually take action. And then when we do not have the innate wisdom and the understanding of self and the understanding of life and our environment and our circumstances and the people in that environment, to make choices and take action that's in alignment with a broader and deeper perspective of everything that we're experiencing, our interpretation of reality. And it's that self-awareness, that wisdom that provides us with that. So it is actually the application of wisdom where we're able to then take empathy from a paralyzing state into a state of action, because that wisdom is self-awareness. Again, linked to the tenet of self-awareness as well. Very, very powerful, very interesting. Now, self-awareness is part of the authentic self model, but the authentic self itself is a tenet of sovereign leadership as well. So, and when we get to the authentic self, I'll go through all that in great detail. So where the window of insight is empathy, the careful, deliberate, and calculated application of that empathy is wisdom. Hence, empathetic wisdom gone together, yeah? Empathy, however, is a truly vicarious experience. It's very experiential, it's very physical, it's very kinesthetic. If your friend is feeling afraid, you too will experience a feeling of fear in your body. It's very kinesthetic, it's very feeling-based. If they are sad, you too will feel deep sorrow. Feeling empathy is allowing yourself to become tuned into another person's emotional experience and their state of being. That's what being empathetic is really about. And it takes courage to do this. It takes courage to be an empath, to deeply connect to people, to be expressive, to experience that expressiveness in that way. But if you have ever experienced real empathy from another, when you have been hurting, you will know that it is a gift. It is a true and powerful gift. And that's one of the reasons why empathy is so powerful. When we go through the benefits, you'll understand that. But it becomes problematic when we can't control it, when we can't understand it. And that's where self-awareness comes in, through that innate wisdom of self and that ability then to engage in our compassion and then take action. We begin to change. We begin to transmute. We begin to transform who we are. We begin to transform our circumstances. We begin to connect deeply to our circumstances. We begin to understand who we are in relation to our environment and how our models of reality, our understanding, our belief systems then begin to influence our behaviors, begin to influence the people that we are and the people that we are becoming. That there becomes a very different value proposition from feeling the pain that we're experiencing, feeling the other person deeply, but not being able to take action. So if we don't couple empathy with wisdom, and we don't arrive at empathetic wisdom, having a tenor of empathetic wisdom, the process can be somewhat fruitless. But remember, empathy in and of itself is not useless, and it's not fruitless. It's not a fruitless path or a fruitless action, because it's necessary as a beginning, at the beginning stages of us, to understand ourselves in great depth and understand ourselves with great clarity. It's very, very important as a beginning stage to help us feel and connect to people. So in a moment, I'm going to go through 16 powerful benefits of empathy and why we need it. We're going to tie all that up after with wisdom. And we're going to go through, of course, a heap of questions as well. Hopefully we'll get through them today. We'll get through a good amount today at least. And I've seen the questions. There's some really powerful questions as well. Have got me really thinking. I'm sure we'll get all of you thinking as well, and help you understand yourself and the role of empathy in your life. And perhaps while we're going through this webinar now, people, this is a really powerful question to ask yourself is, where have I been empathetic in my life? And how has that served me? And then the other question to ask is, where could I have been empathetic? And how could it have served me by being empathetic? So in situations where empathy was called for, empathy was required, but you didn't quite act in that empathetic integrity, how did that affect your life? How did that affect the circumstances by then which you live? And in relation specifically to that scenario. I'd like you to think about that. I'd like you to contemplate that. I think they're two very powerful questions that will begin to help us understand the power of empathy, but also the role it plays in our lives. And additionally, how important it actually is. And I'm hoping by the end of these 16 benefits, you're really going to understand why empathy is so important and why empathy is so powerful and how it can continue to be such a powerful force in our lives. But when we couple it with innate wisdom and awareness of self and our ability then to take action and actively be empathetic, not passively be empathetic, but actively be empathetic, where we are able to take action, it becomes a very empowering gesture, and we're giving. We're, again, remember the tenet of being of service. There's the tenet of sovereign leadership. The first tenet that we covered was being of service. And when we can be of service in humanity, but we can only be of service in humanity by being empathetic. But then being of service requires empathy, but it requires we take action on our empathy. And that, my friends, is the innate wisdom that comes, that couples, connects empathy and action together, the execution of an empathetic posture. So let's go through these 16 key points now, 16 key benefits of being empathetic and how it can enhance our lives, of course, and evolve our souls and expand our minds and improve and envelop our relationships. Let's go through these 16 points now. So number one, it fosters good, pleasurable, and positive feeling. Simple. It's intrinsic. There's simply intrinsic value in being empathetic. It feels really good. Simple as that. Pleasure centers of the brain simply just light up. That's what actually happens. Pleasure centers of the brain light up. Now, I want to read something here. I've got something here. I want to read this. This is an excerpt, so bear with me for a moment. Behavioral research has demonstrated that feeling understood by others enhances social closeness and intimacy, as well as subjective well-being. In contrast, feeling misunderstood can be harmful to social relationships, leading to loneliness and isolation. However, it is still unclear why and how felt understanding exerts such a powerful impact on both interpersonal and intrapersonal well-being. When we are deeply heard, the other is in sync with us and it releases oxytocin. Now, that is very, very interesting. So when we say it feels good, there's a reason why. And we spoke to this a while ago, again, in being the tenet of being of service, where there is a positive feedback loop, where we are biologically hardwired to be giving to others. Now, one way that we are able to be giving to others or assume a giving posture is, guess what? By being empathy, by connecting, by feeling the other. And that action then is because there's a wisdom that interjects and says, I'm self-aware enough, I understand myself enough to be able to move through this space, yeah? So number two, it's a way of being and in life and in the world. So it gives us a sense of identity is what I mean when we're empathetic, because we're connecting. I'm an empathetic person and I will strive to live that way in the world, is a statement we could say. It cultivates connection and deeper understanding of the other. So it's really a process of relating. And that is a benefit because why? We're social, relational beings. So when we relate and we connect with great efficacy, guess what? Guess what's happening? We are being the best version of self that we can be. And that's a very, very powerful place to be, yeah? So think about that when we're thinking about empathy being a way of life. Number three, it fosters emotional and physical health and well-being and wellness via connection, care, inclusion, community, etc. So the links that we're making here is that it's an inclusive practice. It's a practice where we are able to feel and be understood deeply. And that there in and of itself, it fosters that community-based connection. It's very important to understand that when we feel included and when we feel cared for, we are able to do more. We are more connected to self. We are more courageous. We are more courageous in our postures. We feel that we can do more with life and that we can be more because we're part of a team. We feel supported. And it's that empathetic connection that allows us to feel that, yeah? Number 4, being empathetic and applying empathetic wisdom has the capacity to heal painful psychological, physiological, even physiological problems. But psychological in particular, loneliness, alienation, anxiety, fear, depression, despair, shame, guilt. It assists us in, it helps us from having negative, painful, uncomfortable feelings about ourselves, about life. Because we're able to connect with others, we're able to feel what they feel. And it's not only the despair that we can feel that elation as well. So when we're stuck in our own stuff, when we're stuck in our own pain, we can then connect to others and feel their elation, feel their joy, feel their gratitude and their zest for life. And that's a very empowering posture. It really is a healing antidote to negative and painful feelings. Again, because we can then, we go to number 3, we go back to point number 3, we feel supported, we feel included in community. Again, a very empowering, endearing posture. Number 5, it is the active ingredient in conflict resolution. Our ability to connect to others when we are feeling tension and understand where are they coming from and why are they behaving in that way. That is a very powerful, empowering posture. And it allows us insight, deep insight into the minds of others and into the emotional states of others. So it can cut off conflicts before they even happen because we assume a broader perspective, a deepened perspective of the circumstances, of the situation that we engage in. So in other words, we're not simply stuck in our narrow-minded view of that set of circumstances, but rather we move to deeply understand the other. It has the capacity to keep conflicts from escalating because we really assume a broadened view. We don't have those horse blinkers on. The saying goes, take your blinkers off, or stop having a narrow view, or don't see things or observe the world in a black and white fashion. In other words, don't be rigid in your objectives or in your perspective or in your view and your vantage point. What empathy does for us is broaden our vantage point. It allows us to take this helicopter view of our situation that's very inclusive of the other. Again, so revert to number 3, point number 3, it's a very inclusive posture. Number 6, it is a tremendous source of creativity, innovation, and transformative action. Empathy has that power, the power to do that. Empathy connects, transforms, and removes the blocks to action. And if done through an angle of wisdom, so through that vantage point of wisdom, it's a powerfully transformative tool because, again, we're able to connect to others, we're able to view the situation for what it is, from a whole perspective, not a fragmented, broken perspective. We're able to take in the views of others, and we're able to deeply, deeply connect with our own creative prowess. Because when we're empathetic, we take on the vantage point of others. We take on the vantage point, a series of vantage points that are beyond our own. And that almost forces us to be creative in the way we think about that situation, the way we approach that situation, because we factor in so many different variables, we factor in so many different perspectives that we are forced to be creative. And that's what empathy has the power to do. Number 7, it's a gateway to and supports socially desirable values. Again, if we go back to what I said earlier about we're relational and socialized beings, we're biologically hardwired to be of service. We're biologically hardwired to connect because when we're looking after those in our environment or in our communities, in turn, they're becoming stronger, safer human beings. They're becoming more resilient human beings, and in turn that supports us and that protects us from the elements, the environment, whether it be psychosocial, psycho-emotional issues, or whether it be a physical threat that's coming. We enhance our opportunity for survival. So this is why we're biologically hardwired. So when it says it's a gateway that supports socially desirable values, that's exactly what it means. It's healing, it's happiness, it's collaboration, it's understanding, it's, again, creativity and innovation. It's innovating for the sake of innovating in and of itself, so the intrinsic value of innovating and constantly growing and being creative, but it's also innovating because of progress, for the sake of progress. And when I'm speaking to progress, I'm not necessarily speaking to, okay, 10 years ago we were using a computer that was so fast and now we're using a computer that is 10x faster. Not at all. I'm referring to progression of the self, progression of the soul, the evolution and expansion of mind, and the way we view the world, our models of reality, and the way we then apply it, the way we interact with each other. Empathy is a gateway to, again, idealistic, socially desirable values. I say idealistic, and please let me place a caveat on this. I say idealistic because our collective social values right now in the mainstream aren't really as well aligned, as inclusive as they could be. There's a great deal of conflict. There's a great deal of social misunderstanding, misunderstanding of self as well. And again, it's a sad, from one perspective, of course, it's a sad place to be, but humanity is also growing from that. And there's a lot of wonderful things that are happening in the world, of course, wonderful events, wonderful actions taking place, people awakening, collective groups of people awakening as well. So we also must factor that into account. Number 8, it expands our perspectives. It's a way of knowing, almost like a sixth sense. It's almost, it expands our intuition is what it does. It's a way of knowing what others know and feel. So because when we're empathetic, we feel, we connect to what others are feeling. We know, we have this innate knowing. That's where the wisdom comes in, and we can relate. We relate so much better. It provides us with multiple perspective, eyes and hands on a situation. And that, my friends, that entrusts us with more power and more ability to do more, to be greater, to be the best version of self that we can be. It gives us a greater perspective on ourselves as well, not just others. Number 9, it helps us find and meet our needs, values, and aspirations. Because again, remember, the sovereign leader connects everything to self. And so the sovereign leader should. The sovereign leader needs to, because it's about self. It's about being the best version of self and for others, and to be of service for others. So when we say it meets our needs, values, and aspirations, when we empathetically connect to ourselves and we begin to feel what we're feeling, we connect to that, and then we move to understand that and be wise in the action that we take with respect to how we feel about certain elements of the world or ourselves or relationships or whatever it may be. We then become empowered to grow because we're growing and learning from each situation that we experience. We learn very clearly boundary identification when we're empathetic, because we learn what triggers us. We learn the feelings, our internal state, and then we can relate that to the outside world. We know when should we step forward, when should we step backwards. We know when should we step to the right, when should we step to the left. Well, my left, your right. But we begin to learn about when and where to take the certain or specific action that's required in order to evolve our own selves and be of greatest value to others as well. And expands our consciousness. It really does help us meet our needs, our values, our aspirations, our dreams, our purposes, yeah? Number 10, it increases us helping others, and it increases our capacity to engage in altruistic behavior. Now that in and of itself, people, again, when we go back to understand, we are biologically hardwired. We are biologically hardwired to be of service to others, to be the best version of self that we can be. And when I hear that, that gets me so excited. Like, I just think to myself, wow, okay, we are firing here. Like this is happening. This is what Earth is about. I'm just going to make an adjustment here to the computer. We are about. Sorry, one moment. We are about learning about who we are, the best version of who we are. And that, my friends, is so powerful. It's so intrinsically powerful. I'm just making an adjustment here. Sorry, people. Just to the computer. I think that's a little bit better. You probably don't notice any difference. I do. It's an OCD thing, probably. I'm just recalibrating the computer, making sure it's level. Back to where I was. Altruistic behavior, so powerful. Again, we realize that we're hardwired to be of service. I mean, look, let's not look at, there are intrinsic, I was very careful when I put this in there, but there are intrinsic points of contention associated with altruism. Some people would say altruism doesn't exist at all, because if you're happy that you are of service to someone, then you're receiving something from that service, therefore it's not altruistic. But I don't want to get involved in that conversation or in that sticking point. That's not what that's the tongue tied. That's not what this point is about. Point number 10 is really about being of powerful, profound service to others, and empathy allows us to do that quite effortlessly, actually. Number 11, we're able to feel presence, as opposed to, in versus, feeling distance, aloneness, or the feelings of being alone and feeling alienated. So instead of fighting, fleeing, freezing, we've got choices: fighting, fleeing, or fighting, fleeting, flight, fight, freeze, or empathy, empathizing. With empathy, we develop more presence. So what happens is we begin to move into this part of our brain. We begin to move into the frontal lobe, into the prefrontal cortex. We become less from the R-complex brain, the reptilian brain, the cerebellum, and we begin to respond rather than react. And empathy allows us to do that because it broadens, again, our understanding of the situation, the set of circumstances that we're a part of. So instead of withdrawing, we remain open and present to ourselves and to others and to the circumstance, the situation. What value and learning and growing is there that can come from this? We need to understand that we're no longer in an environment where our physical environment is volatile and dangerous. It's granted in some parts of the world, unfortunately, it still is. But for the majority of us, blessed that we are, very grateful, we don't live in that situation. So this tension that we receive, this reactive state that we come from to psycho-emotional, psychosocial circumstances doesn't need to occur. We feel that we're threatened. We feel that our threat funnel throughout, our threat funnel's high as observed through our eyes, which is our primary sensory organ, in terms of, so our visual primary sense, the visual organ is the primary sensory organ for analysing our threat funnel of our environment. It's going off, but the radar's going off when we're in tensile situations. But again, we need to understand that we're no longer in this volatile physical environment as we used to be 10,000, 20,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago. We're far more adept now as a humanity, and we're able to get more from who we are. So instead of withdrawing, we remain open. We are very present with ourselves and with others. We're not so quick to revert to those instinctive postures. We're able to really access the frontal lobe and respond by understanding the fullness of what we're experiencing, as opposed to not understanding the fullness of what we're experiencing. And empathy allows us to do that because it gives us context, and it provides us with context, and it provides us with varying vantage points that allows us to then see the situation for the fullness of what it is, for the truth of what it is. Yeah, very powerful. Number 12, we feel more openness in general versus deceptive, closed off, hidden, or bottled up postures. So again, empathy allows us to engage in an open state of being as opposed to a closed state of being. Openness, closeness. We assume postures of courage as opposed to postures of fear. When we start to develop the powers of empathy and imagination, our whole world opens up. And that's a very, very powerful place to be. It's an empowering place to be, and it's also very inspiring for others. The posture of a sovereign leader ultimately is to be of service to others whilst evolving self. expanding self. And really, assuming an inspirational posture of any kind is what the sovereign leader is about. So for me, that's very exciting. And this empathy allows us to do that. This posture of empathy allows us to feel more openness and not be so closed off and step into courage. And when we step into courage, others are inspired to do the same. They feel connected to do the same. Well, this is so powerful, so inspiring. Number 13, we feel spaciousness versus feeling constricted or being cramped or having feelings of being boxed in, because we're not coming from fear and a rigid understanding of the world that we live in that's very restricted and constricted. Rather, we are coming from a very open space again. So being empathetically heard allows us to open up and unfold our emotional selves. Allows vulnerability. So really number 13 is about vulnerability. And vulnerability is very, very powerful. It's a powerful tool for projecting strength and exhibiting strength and expressing strength and being strong. That's what empathy allows us to do. It allows us to be vulnerable. So in a time where we can feel a great sense of spaciousness, the body relaxes, the musculature relaxes, the nervous system relaxes. So the physiological benefits of feeling that spaciousness, being vulnerable in self, sharing deeper aspects of self and deeper aspects of who we are is such a powerful tool, a collaboratively powerful tool that we can't not succeed because we're growing and expanding in that process. Number 14, we generally will feel more calm and relaxed when we're empathetic. Now, caveat, we won't if our empathy is not in control. So if we can't control our empathetic postures and our empathetic nature and our understanding of self, we won't feel more calm and relaxed. And that's where wisdom comes in. And we're going to speak to wisdom soon, obviously. But that's where wisdom comes in, because we can't feel relaxed if we don't understand ourselves. And wisdom is part of self-awareness as well, okay? Again, back to feeling more relaxed and feeling calmer versus being agitated, nervous, and experiencing a tensile feeling in our being, in the entirety of our being, yeah? At number 15, we're able to feel deeper intimacy versus aloneness and antagonism and disunion and isolation with self and with other. Empathy connects us. We are able to feel deep intimacy with our partners, with our intimate partners, with our friends, our colleagues. The great Carl Rogers said, when empathy is extended, it satisfies our needs and wish for intimacy. It rescues us from our feelings of aloneness or being alone. And that's a very powerful posture again to assume. And it's a very inclusive statement as well, yeah? Number 16, final one. We're able to feel deeper caring versus indifference, disregard, feeling of ignorance or being ignored, and negligence, or negligence and also being neglected. We feel legitimate caring for others, and we feel legitimately cared about when we're able to be empathetic. Because remember, when we're able to be empathetic, and if we're choosing peer groups that are aligned with our values and the purpose of who we are, etc., therefore, when we're being vulnerable and being empathetic with them, there's a value alignment there, and they will also be vulnerable with us. So we then feel that connection. We don't feel ignored when we express ourselves. We build trust in that way. So the big part of number 16 is empathy allows us to build trust, and trust equals safety, equals familiarity, equals comfort, equals an ease in being and an ease in action. And it's from that ease and that openness that we grow and expand who we are. Yeah, that's the connection that's made there. So they're 16 very, very powerful points. Okay, so I want to go through another saying, and that saying is from Marcel Proust, And Marcel Proust says, we're speaking to wisdom now, by the way, we are not provided with wisdom, we must discover it for ourselves after a journey through the wilderness, which no one else can take for us, an effort which no one can spare us. I really like it. I'm going to read that again, people. I think that's a very powerful statement because it really assumes ownership and responsibility of our own life path and who we are and where we're going. And it really allows us to express wisdom and what that actually means. We are not provided with wisdom. We must discover it for ourselves after a journey through the wilderness, which no one else can take for us, an effort which no one can spare us. Marcel Proust. I really like that. I'm a big fan of that saying, of that statement. Yeah. So let's look to some qualities of the wise and how we may cultivate wisdom. Self-awareness. We've spoken to that throughout the entire webinar thus far, the last 45 minutes or so. We really must understand that self-awareness is key, knowing self in depth in as many different ways as possible, from as many different vantage points and perspectives as possible, placing ourselves in various situations, then analysing, understanding, reflecting deeply on those situations, asking quality questions of self, cultivates self-awareness, paying attention and observing our inner self-talk, that also cultivates self-awareness. Consciousness, being conscious of our surroundings, of our environment, of our inner state, our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, that also cultivates wisdom. Being self-realised and being self-actualised, which are two tenets of sovereign leadership as well. We've spoken to them in the last few weeks. Being self-actualised is expressing our potentiality and then, of course, understanding that, being attentive to that state. Being self-realised, feeling, I'm really summing this up now, but being self-realised, we're fully connected to everything. There's a oneness that occurs, and when that inclusive oneness is understood and felt and experienced, life becomes very, very different. We're stoic in nature. Wisdom promotes stoicism, where we observe natural value in every life experience. We are able to observe the value in everything that we do and everything that we become. We realise our own worth. We recognise, we embrace our own self-worth. That's, again, a very powerful place to be. We move with deliberate intention. We move with clarity of direction. Again, we take something there from the samurai, the Bushido way. We move with attention. We move with attention to detail, deep attention to detail. In fact, we're so attentive to self that we have this deep understanding and connection of who we are and how we move, and the things that we say and the feelings that we have and the thoughts that take place in our mind. We're also very attentive to others and the way they move and the way they understand the world as well. We deeply query life. Being wise and also cultivating wisdom is our ability to deeply query life. We experience a richness in life experiences. So we move through understanding that life is rich, adversity included. And this is the tenet of the resilient warrior, where we have this diverse, rich life experience that includes the pain, the suffering that we've gone through, but we've learned from that, we've grown from that, we've been able to then teach that and pass that wisdom on to others as well, because we understand the importance of it so deeply, the adversity, the challenge that we experience in life. We have a very broadened perspective of life. That's another characteristic of the wise. And another way to cultivate wisdom as well is to view life broadly, empathetically. Humility is part of applied wisdom, that humbleness, that humility, that gratefulness. We also must understand wisdom in the context of experiencing life existentially. Otherwise, it becomes abstract and void of understanding. So experiencing wisdom is very, very experiential. It's a powerfully experiential process. It's about learning from taking action and living life fully. That's what it's about. We develop a powerful and profound intra and interconnected understanding of self and of others. And finally, the ability to take action on life, and all of this then ties empathy to compassion and links the two and allows all of those felt benefits above to actually take place. And that's what wisdom does. So wisdom really is the backbone of applying empathy and being empathetic. Now, people, I'm going to disappear for literally 30 seconds and I'm going to come back and I will be 30 seconds away. One moment, please. I'm back. Apologies. Thank you for being patient. But what I'm hoping that would have happened then in that 30 seconds to 60 seconds is that you would have been giving some thought, some deep thought to wisdom and some deep thought to empathy and what we've spoken about the last 45 plus minutes. So what we're going to do now, people, is we're going to go through some questions. We're going to begin to answer quite a few questions here. I'm probably not going to get through all of them. I'm going to, of course, do my best. And I'm going to endeavour to get through all of our questions. But here we go. Now, if you have any specific questions along the way, please feel free to ask. Otherwise, I'm going to get stuck into these questions. Some really great questions here. So, does experiencing challenge make us wiser and more empathetic? Depends, is the answer. Great question. I'm going to repeat that. Does experiencing challenge, and I'm just going to paraphrase here, hardship, adversity, etc., make us wiser and more empathetic? It can. Yes, absolutely. It actually bestows upon us the opportunity to do so. But many of us, I shouldn't say many, sorry, some of us will not embrace that opportunity, will not embrace that power, will not embrace that ability to connect fully to the self, will not embrace that ability to learn and grow from adversity and challenge. And that's a shame and it's sad, but it's also a reality. And so we continue then to repeat the same experiences again and again until we've learned from them and grown from them, and we can move on until we develop a new neural pathway and develop a new neural firing pattern in our brain that we experience a very similar situation. Instead of reacting in the same manner that we always do or responding in the same way that we always do, we choose to respond differently. So adversity and challenge really just does that. It challenges us deeply. It forces us to make choices about our growth and our expansion, or it forces us to make choices about who we are and who we wish to be. Next question. Hope that answers that. How can you, let me go back to that actually. When I say it depends if we pay attention to ourselves and to the process, and if we're willing and open to learn as well and to grow and to then gain. We extract that wisdom and teaching and then move to the next level of our own expansion. Next question. How can you tell when someone needs help? Tell me the steps you go through to provide comfort. Okay, really, that's a great question. So first of all, a little bit of discernment is required. You know, a willingness to actually want to be present for others and to also recognize pain in others. So to not be so narcissistic, to not be overly self-absorbed, but to find a balance where if someone is in pain or despair, firstly, we can recognize that. And generally we can, most people can, unless there's a pathology in the mind, of course, or we have a psychosocial, psycho-emotional condition. I use the term condition loosely, but there's a pathology. There's an abstract pathology in the mind that deviates from the norm, so to speak. That's the first step, is being able to recognize that pain or that discomfort, and they need assistance. Next is, okay, the steps. So the steps that I would go through to provide someone with comfort is firstly ask if I can be in their space. Can I be present in their space? Can I enter their space? Is that okay? Is it safe to do so? Do they feel safe? And to let them know that I mean no harm, but I'm here to just be of service. Do they need an ear? Is there something? I ask them. It's a very collaborative. For me, it's a very collaborative process. I ask that individual, what do you need from me? How can I be of service? How can I be of assistance? This is your temple. Your temple being you are you. You feel directly what you're experiencing. You know directly what you're experiencing, even if you can't verbalize it. It's in your temple. How can I be of service in your house? This is your house. How can I be of service in your house? And I don't mean the physical home or dwelling. I'm referring to their temple of emotional feeling, of their psyche, their spirituality. So I go through that process first. What are the other steps I'll go through? Then if they're open to me being of service, I ask, how can I help? How can I be of service? Is it okay to be of service? Is it safe to enter? Tell me a little bit about what you're feeling. Let's try and put some words around it. I'll ask some key questions, because the quality of the questions we ask ourselves in life and of others determine the quality of the life we live and the quality of the outcomes that we experience. And then, of course, it's really just connecting empathetically. It is feeling that pain. It is feeling that discomfort, but also then stepping into my wisdom, into my awareness of self, into my compassion, making sure I don't drift too much into empathy where I become paralyzed, or I also feel that pain too much where I can't act either. So there's a balance there. So I'm very aware and mindful of that. I'm always mindful of stepping into compassion and inspiration and wisdom, as opposed to remaining stuck in empathy. Okay, really important. So they're the steps that I take, and then it's just a continued, sincere, deliberate process. Very attentive here, very listening all the time, always listening. And if permits, there's human contact, there's physical contact that's made there as well, because that can be very reassuring for individuals, for all of us. Okay? Next question. Describe something that you have learned from caring for or helping others. Oh, that's a really beautiful question. I appreciate that question. Thank you. Okay. Well, I'll start. I'll mention my grandparents. So I've been thinking about my grandparents today. I was outside in my backyard, because I live in my family home. My grandparents have passed on. My grandmother passed away last year, and my grandfather passed away early this year. And they were beautiful people, and I was very close to them. And I love them dearly and miss them immensely as well. And we were very close. I cared for them for probably the last, 10 years. Yeah, 10 years. So cared for them for quite some time, and then it just got a little bit too much. A number of reasons. Wouldn't go into that now, but they needed 24-hour care. Obviously, couldn't provide 24-hour care. It was a little bit challenging. I was at some stages, but it was challenging. So they went into a home, of course. But nevertheless, the point I'm making is what I learned from helping them was patience and resilience, and the ability to continue to love and care for someone, albeit being very challenging and difficult in that caring phase and in that process, and that patience, but then to observe the love they had for me. And I was very fortunate that I was very close to my grandparents, of course, very blessed, and the love and appreciation they had for me. And that was, of course, an external positive feedback loop that took place in me, that gave me an appreciation, understanding for their pain as well. So that's probably an appreciation, understanding for other people's pain. And that's empathy, really. And that's what I've learned from caring and helping others. And that my grandparents are an example. But the reason why I mentioned my grandparents is because this morning I was in my backyard. The sun was beautiful this morning, beautiful spring morning. And the fig trees, there's 2 fig trees that my grandfather planted probably 30 years ago, so maybe even longer, but definitely 25 years. The huge trees, and they provide beautiful fruit. And figs are beautiful fruits. Obviously in the summertime, in the next few months, and the leaves are just starting to sprout now. It was just beautiful. The sun was shining through, and I took a picture, and it brought me back to when my grandfather and I would toil the soil, and he had a big garden with peas and beans, and I suppose to answer the question, just describe something you have learned from caring for or helping others, is also the fond memories that are associated with that as well, and the bond and the connection that creates a deepened connection, because we can have many connections with many people in life, but the depth of a connection, the depth of an intimate connection with someone, that's fucking powerful. So that's what I've learned. I hope I didn't go into too much detail there. Next question. How do you know you have connected with another person you are helping or caring for? Practice. intuitive practice. I'm very blessed that I get to work with beautiful people day in, day out on various levels and layers, intimately, one-on-one, in groups, online, to the masses, in audiences. How do we know when we're connecting? It's intuitive, it's feeling, it's practice, it's experience. But look for those micro movements on the face. Again, that's an art in and of itself and something that takes years to practice. But look for the shift. Ask the question, how do you feel? We don't ask questions these days, people. We don't get involved and directly just say, well, how do you feel from that experience? How do you feel from what I have just said or how we have connected? How do you feel? What are you feeling? What are you feeling? What are you experiencing internally right now? Can you help me understand that? That's how we know we've connected with it. Have we connected? Ask the question. If you're unsure, simply ask the question. We place such a negative perception and we don't value enough not knowing. So it's okay not to know is my point here. Ask the question. That's how you know if you can't intuitively connect with heart and mind and gut. Next question. Probably last one here, guys, as well, I'd say. Is empathy something we can see or experience on a daily basis? Yes, absolutely. Based on what we've gone through the last 55 plus minutes or so, definitely it is. It is something that we can experience every day because we can connect to ourselves empathetically. How am I feeling? I can ask myself that any time of the day. What am I feeling? How does what I'm feeling make me feel? These are questions that we can ask ourselves every day, every moment of every day. Okay, so yes, the answer is yes to that. One more question because I'm excited. Do you think empathy is a quality we value in our greater collective, families, culture, subgroups, in our schools or in our society? If so, how? If not, why? I'm going to sit on the fence with this one. I'm not going to sit on the fence and not answer it. I'm going to sit on the fence and say aspects of our collective, family, culture, subgroups, like schools, education system, society, etc., does value empathy, and other aspects of it don't. Other aspects of society don't value the quality of empathy because we don't understand it. And we're afraid. We're afraid to connect. We're afraid to go deep because we're afraid to open ourselves up because we're afraid to be vulnerable. Western society doesn't value vulnerability. That's the problem. We don't value the process and the strength and the power and the prowess found in vulnerability. We think that being vulnerable is a weakness, and if we're engaged in being weak, therefore we're left open to be damaged or be hurt or be attacked or die. So it's a self-preservation thing. We've made this association that vulnerability is directly associated with self-preservation, and that if we're vulnerable, we decrease our chances of survival. That's not true. And empathy is directly related to being open. Because when we're open, we're able to understand, connect, invite others to do the same. We're inclusive and we're able to apply wisdom. So unfortunately, but there are pockets of society, of course, depending on what your family is, the culture of your family, the ethnicity of your family, what your family values are. Some families are taught to be very open, empathetic, connect, ask questions, communicate. Communication is a big key as well. That's the first time we've spoken to that at the end of this webinar, is that communication is huge when it comes to empathy, understanding ourselves, communicating with self. The sovereign leader must be effective in communicating with self, and then of course communicating with others to then maintain that inspirational, powerful posture. So yeah, the answer is aspects of society do value empathy, aspects of don't. If not, why? I think I've answered that with the vulnerability piece. If so, how? By being open, inclusive, by communicating. And look, there are many schools and more schools these days that are actually doing that, that are actually engaging in allowing children to speak their truth when they're feeling vulnerable, to speak that, and it's safe to do so. Powerful. So it's a combination of both, and it's transforming and transcending, and it does with every era and every subgroup of people. So grateful, so blessed, so happy. Thank you for joining. Thank you for being here. If you have any questions, please email me, Facebook message me, Instagram me, Skype me, LinkedIn me. I'm all over social media. If you believe in these webinars, please share them. Share them broadly, share them widely, share them with your loved ones. Connect with others. Talk about these discussion points. We're only going to expand our consciousness and evolve our being by speaking, connecting, communicating. engaging. There is lots of love to you. Thank you so much for being present. Many blessings on your journey. I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you so much.